is Alex Barbosa. I'm Portuguese, so and working pretty much between Lisbon and London nowadays. And my partner Felix Peterson is actually starting to build our presence in Berlin. We are pretty much as old as these three startups. As an investor, we're also a startup. We're 3 years old, and we were along the way tremendously fortunate to know these guys. And we very quickly fell in love with their passions and their intentions and their ideas, and that's what brought us here today. One of the things that we're assuming is that most of you want to listen to the sort of making of, behind the scenes stories of what drove these guys to actually start their companies and the hard truth of building a company. So please raise your hand if you're actually starting a company or thinking of starting a company. Don't be shy. Good. Great. So let's start with that. You all have different stories. Mick, it's not your first time. Can we go back to a little bit about yourself and the way you started your first company and what drove you to actually starting a second company, and what's the passion been over the years?
Yeah, so I'll try not to take. I'll just try to summarize it because there's so much there. But basically, so I was going to Princeton University, and I was just antsy to like do stuff and make stuff and build stuff. And I had just gone through the college admissions process. You apply, you take tests, and the universities don't just look at your test scores, but they look at sort of your whole package, I guess, for lack of a better word, you know, what extracurriculars you were in, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it was just a super frustrating process, and I realized, man, there has to be a better way, and why not have a website where high school students could create profiles about themselves and showcasing all of their wonderful talents and skills. They could upload media, blah, 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 and then universities could get on and search and communicate and talk to these students. So in a way, it was sort of like LinkedIn, but specifically for high school students getting into university. And I dropped out. Well, so we started playing around with the idea, talking to some of the admissions people and high school students, and it worked wonderfully. Everybody was super excited by it, and so we dropped out, started that company. But for me, so just to answer the question, it was because I was super frustrated having just gone through this process. I was super anxious because I wanted to build. As a freshman at university at Princeton, I had to take classes that I just wasn't interested in. One was like the diaspora of Greek traders and just a bunch of random stuff. And so I was just anxious. I wanted to build something, and I was frustrated with this process. So for me, it was just like, well, let's just drop out and let's do this. And then we ended up building it for 6 years and acquired by a public company, and it was a good outcome. But that's basically how that process started. I just felt the pain and I wanted to fix it.
And then started still with you for a while. For the second time around, you felt another pain, and you decided to, well, let's
yeah,
the whole thing
man, I don't want to take up all the time. It's a big, long story. I started working on another product. So that one was the first company was acquired. It was a good exit, and I didn't want to stay with a big company. I wanted to get back in early stage. Started working on a product in social media, sort of like Flipboard or Nuzzle, sort of a social newsreader. We couldn't get the traction we needed. Pivoted. I wanted to get back to the core of what I had been working on before, which is just like connecting people in a better way. And so that's when we started to think about email. But again, it was something that I was frustrated with, something that I felt the pain I wanted to solve. And it was, you know, anytime I have an idea that's just keeping me up at night, and it's like, man, like this has to exist. Why doesn't this exist? Somebody's got to do it. It just, to me, was the answer, like, man, I just need to start this company. And so, I mean, that's basically, to summarize it. Obviously, there's so many little stories and battles in there, but it was, any time I started a company or a product, it was because it was a pain that I was feeling or I had just felt, and I was frustrated that there wasn't a better way.
Well, thank you. Sofia, your story is slightly different. We met in the earliest days of your intentions to build a company. Tell us a little bit about your journey until you got to that stage.
Yeah, well, I spent the last 13 years helping different businesses to grow in different levels, from acquisition, retention, trying to understand how people grow these businesses. And I've been hired to do that for a long time. And for all the period of time, I have experienced exactly the same issue. Like, how do you understand customers? And how you make sense of all these things that they're telling you, and you build better products, and you build better marketing, and you build better business strategy. And the last 7 months ago, I was still working for a company called Gecko Board here in London. It's a very successful data visualization company. And I experienced that pain again. We were really trying to grow, and we were really trying to make something happen. And in that process, I just started feeling a little bit like Mick, like, how can we do this? How come that we have all this intention to understand our customers, and it's so hard to make sense of all this survey data and all these customer support tickets and all these conversations? And I thought somebody, had to fix that, and I couldn't find a way of doing it, so I started doing it myself. But I started doing that myself in the evenings and the weekends, and with my co-founder who used to work as well at Gecko Board. And I got a lovely invitation actually to speak in an event that Faber Ventures put together for their portfolio companies in Lisbon. I went there to talk about Gecko Board and how we grew the business and SaaS in general. But then I realized that they were absolutely brilliant people, and they were building amazing companies. So I sent them an email, and I said, I'm building this. And maybe you might be interested. We started conversations, and we finally got to a point where we can actually work together. And that's how I kind of made that leap. But it all comes to that feeling of understanding that you have to solve a problem, and it has to be something that you really care about. Because I started businesses before, and if you start something that you don't really care about, you can give up very easily. So you need to feel that it needs to be solved by you. Yep. And that is my quick summary, maybe not that fast. There you go.
Thank you. Mike, how did it all start?
When I was 6. So, I think that's, I was thinking a lot about this before I started, and I had this roundabout way of getting to where I am today, which is I always had this entrepreneurial spirit, and I set up my first business as a 6-year-old back in South Africa. We had this church down the road from us, and everyone in South Africa normally drives cars, but except this one church, everyone would sort of walk past our house to go to the church. And so I sat there as a kid, and I thought, they must like crosses. And so I basically got these tomato boxes, and I made crosses out of them, and I sold them to all the people going to church. And they bought them, and that was kind of interesting. And then later I kind of sold like cans of Coca-Cola to people at our first general election, because everyone was there and thirsty and no one was selling drinks. So I would do that. And then I had this other startup in South Africa building like web content management platforms back in the late 90s in the first .com boom, and we came here to the UK with stars in our eyes, and everyone was going to use our platform, and then the bubble burst, and further away? Bit close. Is that right? And then the bubble burst, and no one wanted to talk about the internet, and the internet was dead, and no one will ever put their credit card into the internet, and that's game over. And so I started working for some other startups, and I worked at this one company doing document collaboration. And then I found this really interesting company called Skype, and they did this free calling over the internet. And I said to my boss, I'm going to go join this thing. And he told me I was crazy because no one would ever make free calls over the internet. That's the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. And I went to this company called Skype, and I was there from like 80 to 2,000 people, and learned a lot about communication, collaboration, messaging. And one of the other traits of an entrepreneur is like headstrongness, which is another way of saying you think you're always right. And there were a lot of things that I just thought we were doing wrong at Skype, and I wanted to change, but there was just too much momentum, and the inertia to get past was quite difficult. And so I created this company to build this product to basically help businesses collaborate using messaging. And when we were pretty much halfway through that, this other company who raised like $40 million to build this game called Tiny Spec kind of pivoted, and they built this thing called Slack, which was exactly what we were trying to build, with 4 times the size of team, much bigger funding, and they did it really well. And so we had to kind of figure that out, and we pivoted away from that and towards what we're doing today, which is more public community, and that's how we've managed to build a business.
Well, great. Well, just to give you a little bit of context, we met, Faber met you guys over the course of the last year and a half, and one of the permanent discussions that we have within our team is looking back. Would we invest all over again? Would we do exactly the same thing? And it's not just because you're here, but what drove us to actually asking your permission to get involved in your projects was actually not only your motivation and your passion around building your companies, it was like this humongous space, opportunity space that you were trying to explore and tackle, and actually transform the way people either live or work. And specifically in your 3 areas, we just assumed, and we now believe that more than ever, that we met the right people to build those companies. And so it's first and utmost for us as investors about the people. And this involves a lot of aspects and a lot of circumstances, but it's pretty much about the founders and the founding team and the people that surround the founders. So when we first met a year and a half ago, and Sofia we met pretty much a year ago, what were you thinking at that time? And to help the audience also, at the end of the day, we're trying to get you guys to build your own companies and help you in any way we can. So what were like the easy things that you did that you would do all over again, or what were the hardest things that you had to do even before getting in front of an investor or even before incorporating a company? What was the hardest thing that you had to overcome that you could advise this whole audience about?
Probably identifying the idea, because you can have tons of ideas every single day and they all can be brilliant or they can be all crap. It doesn't matter. It is about the process of assessing what is that you're going to do and why you're going to do it, and if you are ready to do that thing as well. So I went through, before talking to Faber or meeting with Faber at all, we went through a process where, I went through so many ideas of problems that I wanted to solve, but this particular problem bothered me for so long. And I needed to think through, like, is this something that I want to spend the next 7-10 years of my life building? Is this something that I'm going to be happy if it's really, really hard and I don't get to actually make it work? Is it something that I want to really dedicate all my time and resources and take the risk, which is, we can talk about risk later, but this is something that I feel passionate enough, that I understand well enough. So going through the process of understanding your idea and why you would actually take that leap for that idea is one of the hardest things that I was going through at the time. Now every day is something else is harder than before. But during that period before actually quitting and starting something, it was understanding, is this worth it? Is it worth my time? And other people's times as well in the future. So I think that is a very important step before you jump into building a business, really understanding what is that you're going to do. Most people say, you always hear that in blog posts and in stories, like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. I have no idea what I was doing. That is true at a certain point. It's just because you're entering such an empty space and you have to build that from scratch. But you have to have an idea of what is the vision that you want to build, even if it's very obscure. You have to have some sort of idea where you're heading. So I think that is very hard at the very beginning. And I highly recommend spending a lot of time doing that thinking.
So I want to share my experience with Faber Ventures and sort of going through the process. So I was introduced to Alexandre. Can I call you Alex for the sake of simplicity?
Yeah. I think it's simpler for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. So I lived in Brazil for 2 years earlier in my life. So I speak Portuguese, and I had heard that there was, one of the people at Techstars said, hey, there's this Portuguese investor. You should totally meet up with him. And he made the intro, no response from Alex. But I wanted to meet this Portuguese investor just because I thought it'd be fun to have, like, I don't know, I felt like there was some connection there, even though it's Portugal, Brazil, just being able to speak the language. I thought would be a fun connection. So I pursued it. I said, hey, let's meet up. And finally, I don't know what changed, but Alex was like, okay, let's meet up. And I met with him and did everything I could to get him excited about what we were doing. And we had seen a little bit of momentum in our round. We were fundraising, and so there had been some other investors who had committed, who were going to invest. And I remember Alex just saying, I mean, he's like, it doesn't seem like you need our money. I mean, you've got some good excitement around this round. Why would you take money from us? Why does it matter? And little did he know that even though we had commitments, so often as an entrepreneur, as you're building this sort of the round of funding, as you're putting the round together, it so often feels like you have this house of cards that at any minute it could just all come crumbling down. And so even though, we did have some momentum, like I still thought that we needed that investment. Furthermore, I really liked him. I really liked their firm, right? Like I thought they could add a lot of value, and then the whole Portuguese connection. So anyway, he was still on the fence. For a while, he was on the fence. He's like, I don't know if it makes sense. But one of the things that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you've got to be willing to just like hustle. And I know that word is probably overused, but you've got to be willing to just grind it out. And I remember telling Alex, I'm like, okay, I know you're on the fence. I'm going to fly to Portugal, and we're going to figure this out. I'm not going to leave until we've got this figured out, and you guys are going to be in the round. And so I don't remember what your response was, like, okay, we'll see, like just come on out. And so I took my family out because I had no idea how long it was going to be, and we figured, okay, we could go visit the beaches and get to know Portugal, etc. So I remember we met like the first or second day we were there. I gave my absolute best sales pitch that I could, and even at the end he's like, I'm still not sure. And so I said, okay, I'm not leaving this island until we figure this out. So anyway, I went and toured for a few days with my family, and we had to change our plane ticket twice because I was still waiting to hear back from Alex on what was going to happen. So anyway, he's like, okay, come back. So went back, did the absolute best pitch that I could again. And I think that must have been enough because ultimately they said they were going to invest. And I think of all the investors, so we raised $3.2 million, and they were the third biggest check size. And but again, it was just like, you're going to get people that are sort of on the fence. You're going to get investors that are like, I'm not sure. And you just got to figure it out. You've got to do what it takes to just close that. And they've been great investors, and it's been super fun. So I don't know, I wanted to share sort of that experience. I think it will be relevant as you think about talking to investors and fundraising, etc.
Yeah, if I may give you the other side of the story. It was exactly like this. I mean, when Mick sent me the second email, like a month after the first one, I felt guilty about not replying. And I said, and you sent like this update with tremendous momentum, and I said, well, congratulations. Look, I'm in London, why don't we just catch up over coffee and get together finally? And so we did. Like the morning after, we met at the hotel, and Mick just approaches me speaking Portuguese. I was completely surprised. And so the conversation began there. And when Mick flew out to Lisbon for a few days, the amazing hustle and the amazing persistence and the drive was actually that we got together most of our team. Unlike many investors, alongside our investment team, we have actually a product team and an operations team. And so we got the product team together and to help us actually discuss what Mick and Ryan wanted to build. And Ryan jumped in over Skype from San Francisco. Yeah. And we spent a good couple of hours discussing the project and the opportunity space. And it was an unforgettable set of 3 days. Not only the time that we spent together discussing the product and the venture, but also the time that we spent as a team discussing why the hell we should get involved in this crazy idea. But all the relevant aspects were there. It was the complete passion and drive and competence of the founding team, but it was also for us the end game. It's a complex business to build, but if you actually succeed, the end game can be absolutely tremendous. It can really move the needle and make an impact. And so that basically drove us to wanting to come in and work with you guys. We would have written a larger check if we could. but we found our spot within the round. We even tried our best to actually bring some other investors along and help you guys close everything. And it was a learning experience for us because it was one of the early international investments that we did outside Portugal. It was great to meet a team that was actually considering you were actually doing that already. Completely moving the whole team to London and build a company from here, although all of you were from out of London. So it was a great experience. Mike, we met at TechCrunch Disrupt.
That's right.
But you were already a little bit further down the way.
Yeah, so we had raised some funding before, and we were just starting to look at raising some more.
Mm-hmm. And what helped you most? While you were not only thinking about building the company, but with Andrew, your co-founder, actually the early days, who helped you, how, and what helped you most?
Yeah, and my co-founder, I go back with him from South Africa. I used to work with his now wife at my first startup, and we became best friends, and we kind of, wear the same clothes and just stupid stuff like that. And he is probably one of the best technologists I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot. And because he's incredibly broad, he can just pick up anything and figure it out. And he's also incredibly deep in that he can go really fine into it and just produce miracles. And I think without having him along with me, and I'm lucky because it's Andrew and we kind of go way back, and I still don't understand how I actually convinced him to leave his job, which was in the city, earning huge amounts of money, working in banks, and to come and do this. But I think it's really important to have someone with you on the journey that's can feel all of the pain, because it's a very difficult journey building a company, and your partner will probably not understand you if you're married or you live with someone, because they're not part of it, and it can be quite lonely at times. But your team probably don't fully understand you, and to have someone with you alongside you who can sometimes pick you up when you're down, or can celebrate with you, or to really push you forward is fundamental. And I would absolutely suggest to anyone to find probably one. I don't know if anyone has experience of more than one co-founder, but one co-founder to go along with you. It's especially good for me because I'm headstrong and I always think I'm right, and Andrew's often very, very right as well, and it's useful to have that.
Well, some of the sort of late early stage investors actually specialize in helping founders and teams build from 50 people and grow to 1,000 or 2,000 people. That's the journey that you experienced at Skype. We actually work with founders who are building their initial teams from 0 to 50. And when we met Mike and we met Mick, it was already sort of approximately 5 people teams, and hopefully they'll continue to grow. The experience with you, Sofia, was different. You actually had to go through the challenges of not only finding a balanced way from a personal perspective to actually decide to leave your job and build your company, but also very quickly go about finding the rest of the initial team and making the leap and doing the first things. How was that? I mean, we worked together, but you could have worked with anyone else, or you could have decided to work by yourself. So those initial 2-3 months, what would you say were the highlights of that period?
Yeah, some of the things that made me send that initial email to you was basically the understanding of that level of support that Faber was providing to the portfolio companies, and as part of that support was accessing these resources, which is basically an amazing team as part of Faber helping us to build the product. So at the very beginning we were very closely with the team within Faber to build the product, and then very, very quickly you start needing to transition to having other parts of the team, and the first thing that you do is you just go to your friends and people that you trust and people that you think are amazing at what they do. And it is a very difficult process. It was a lot easier because of the transition with Faber and me working with Faber. But normally it is about selling that passion and that vision to people around you, so they want to be part of it. And that is not necessarily easy to do. And it takes patience, and it takes knowing people and building great relationships. So the process of being two people, me and my co-founder at the beginning, and then building a team, which is still very tiny, it's just we are only 5 people, it's been remarkable in understanding the transition of who you are as part of that team and how you drive that energy and how you help everybody to become better just by being there. It's difficult. I wouldn't be able to necessarily give details on how you do that. It just happens somehow.
Well, a common theme across your 3 companies that you as founders are completely obsessed about building rockstar teams. And that for us is also obviously an insurance, because I mean, if everything goes wrong, I mean, if you have the right group of people together, you can pretty much do anything. How has that been going on in terms of building that rockstar team? Has it been highly challenging, or?
Why'd you hand this to me?
Awesome team.
Yeah, so one of the things that we did early on is we wanted to sort of identify the values that we cared most about, and we, because with the core sort of early people, we wanted to just make sure we were on the same page, that the vision was aligned in terms of the people that we wanted to surround ourselves with. And we ended up writing, we wrote a blog post, it's just on Medium, it's, Mainframe values, but a couple of things there that are critical to us as we think about hiring and growing the team. One is we want to surround ourselves with people who simply just love to learn. When you're building a startup and you're building a product, so much of the process is simply just learning. Figuring out what's working, what's not working, adapting, adjusting, experimenting, learning, and then rinse and repeat. And so some of the questions we like to ask are, what do you do in your free time? What do you do on weekends? I love to read. I love to travel. I love to go to museums. I work on, I like to learn the most, latest and greatest in technologies. Those are good things. That's somebody who's curious. That's somebody who likes to learn. And so that's something that we value a lot. There's a number of other things, but I think that is probably one of the most critical things for an early stage startup. You've got to find people who can learn quickly and who love to learn, because the product that you're building is most likely the wrong product. That's just the reality. And so you just need to be able to juke and jive and adapt very quickly.
Yeah, I think learning quickly and wanting to learn is important, but also being able to understand what is that they want to do. Yeah, so it's just, what is your personal goal? So it's very clear to me, my personal goal is to build and solve this problem, but for somebody else joining your team, their personal goal might be different, but they're just driven by the learning experience. But you have to also understand what is the individual sort of drive. And that requires a lot of communication. So, I remember I was still at Ecoboard when I met Mick, and Mick wanted me to stop building my company so I can, go and work with him. And that energy and how he communicates his vision didn't work with me, but it will work with everybody, because it's part of that process of you understanding the other person, what they want to do. And that is hard, it's remarkable, but it's extremely important, because they will have to join you in this incredible roller coaster of things that will happen to you. So they have to be able to learn, and they have to be able to enjoy that and be able to actually achieve something for themselves too. So I just wanted to add that bit.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most difficult things is building the team and hiring, and it's incredibly time consuming as well, and it's pretty much your job as the founder or one of the founders to build the team, and that means you're taking focus away from the product or from coding or from spending time with meeting investors or selling the product or whatever it might be. And just finding those people, you think it's going to be really easy, because you've got, you especially once you funded and you've got this money and you believe in your vision. And I remember when we first landed financing and we started to build a team, and we went to the Silicon Roundabout, got our little booth there, and we're like, right, we're gonna like tell people, and they're gonna quit their jobs, and they're gonna put everything on the line because we are going to be the next most awesome. And you're like, but you know, and because I mean it's a big commitment for someone else. Often a lot of people aren't as sort of predisposed to risk as you are, and they're much more cautious, and so you really need to make sure that they understand what they're getting into like from a value perspective, from a product perspective, and I think the way we've kind of solved this now is we go and find these people individually, so we don't hire traditionally like through agents or through job postings or anything like that anymore. We basically just go and source people and try and find, right, we use this particular technology, and we're going for who's the best person. And in particular, like from a developer's point of view, you can go and just find these people who've contributed to the open source projects, find them individually, and we have a remote culture at work, so no matter where they are in the world, you could say, come, you can basically build on this technology that you love all day, and it's a kind of interesting product because it's for developers. So for us, it's become easier, but certainly in the first year when we weren't well known, like building the team was the most difficult thing we probably had to do.
And you all had completely different experiences, although you both went through Techstars as an accelerator program. I mean, Mike, you didn't go to any accelerator or anything of the kind. The interesting thing is just also as an additional detail that after working with Sofia and Lukas, her co-founder, when we first met, we spent a month and a half basically working together, and our team worked together with the founding team of NomNom, just basically discussing all aspects of the product, but also the opportunity space, go-to-market, and basically aligning how our points of view about the same space. And when we felt we were ready to actually discuss a proper long-term partnership, then we presented the term sheet and we agreed on the investment. But that first month and a half of sort of no strings attached type of co-work that we did together actually inspired us to create a small program that we call Founder in Residence. It's sort of an artistic residency pre-investment that we invite founders to go through before we actually do any pre-seed or angel investment. It's just sort of a Kickstarter for us to breathe the same air, work together, and actually end up finding out that we want to continue working together because it's a long-term journey. And people tend to congratulate you whenever you close your round of financing. You close the round, everybody congratulates you and says, well, you did it, that's it. It's actually when it starts, right? It starts once you have all conditions and all aspects gathered that allow you to actually continue your work and go about the next step. So now that you're actually building your companies and growing the companies, what either keeps you up at night, or probably most interesting, what keeps you even more confident than you were a year ago or a year and a half ago? Why do you believe now more than ever that you're building the right thing?
Let's go back to me. Go.
I guess the thing that gives me the most confidence is we're very metric orientated sort of internally, and so we measure everything that people are doing and look at our growth, look at retention, and just truly understand like the metrics behind the business and when those are moving in the right direction, and when you do things that you believe are going to move it in the right direction and it actually happens, which is like not all the time at all, and you can see that happening. I think that probably gives us the most confidence in what we're doing is right, because those are the decisions that we make every day, and you need to make them as quickly as you can and execute them as quickly as you can and learn from them as quickly as you can. And that's probably for us the number one thing. And then just sentiments. So when people are, you probably know a lot about sentiment because of your business, but when people say great things about you, or when you meet people in like we met this person in a coffee shop in New York just randomly who used our products, and she was like, oh wow, that's awesome. And you know, my partner and I both came out there with just such a glow, even though it was just one person, but that kind of gives you just belief that if you can affect one person in a positive way, there are millions of other people you can affect in a positive way as well.
Sofia?
Yeah, pretty much along the same lines. It's just, for me, because we are so early stage, we are in private beta, it is part metrics, but also conversations with potential users, conversations with current users. So every time we get an email, we understand what they hate and what they love about the product. Every time we have a Skype call and we go deeper into why this is a problem for them and how they are solving it, or what they've been trying to do for years to solve it or not, it's part of getting that energy back and understanding, yes, we're doing something important here, we're trying to solve something that matters. So that's what keeps me very excited, confident today. What keeps me awake, it is so many things, because you're thinking about how can the team work faster and better and be happy. That is such a combo, it's so difficult to achieve. Or can we release this faster, you know, before the year ends, or, you know, talking to investors, and the whole fundraising process is stressful and it's fun and stressful at the same time. It's an interesting combination too. But I think it's overall the only way to keep confidence is just to understanding that you're solving something that you really want to solve, and get validation with the people that are actually going to benefit from it. That's for me.
Yeah, I think it's important to, you know, I try to treat every day as a new day, meaning you're going to have hard days. It's not easy. It's actually very hard to do a startup. And so anytime you can sort of get a win under your belt, take it and be happy with it and raise a glass to it. You know, like Alex was saying, even, you know, closing a round of funding in and of itself, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter a whole lot. You still need to make a business, you still need to make a product people love, but at the same time, it's a moment to pause and be happy. You've convinced people to give you some money, and that's cause for taking the team out to lunch or dinner or something, whatever, right? So I think it's important that you try to cherish those small victories, those small wins, because by and large, you know, going through this is a grind, it's hard, the default outcome is failure. And so every day, just, you know, bounce out of bed, let the defeats just sort of trickle off you like you're in a raincoat and it's raining, and just keep moving forward and just hustle, do what it takes, but it's very hard.
Well, Mike, I mean, part of this audience probably is still on their active jobs, working for large companies. I mean, there's a time in the process, along the process, when you actually realize it's now or never. So tomorrow I'm going to quit, and then it's not only about weekends and spending the nights awake working on this side project. This is going to be plan A. When was that moment for you?
Oh, I think it was a bit. I think it was actually 2 years past the time I did it, actually, and I think that, especially if you've got a good job and it pays good money, and money is like a drug, and you can never have enough of it, because in this society there's always the next most awesome phone, car, house, boat, yacht, you know, whatever it is, and at some point, sometimes, especially when you're younger in your career, and I've been there, when, you know, those are the things that kind of motivate you, and there's this sort of success ladder that's laid out in front of you, that you need to be the VP of this or that, and there's this kind of path there, and then suddenly you realize that actually you're not that happy every day going to work. And I think if the number of days where you wake up in the morning and you aren't looking forward, I mean really looking forward to going to work, outweigh the days when you do, then you're way past it, and like either find something else or do something else completely, because that's the most important thing. We spend more waking hours of our life at work than with people we love, and so it better be the right kind of time to spend with the right people, with the right idea, and that's how I feel about that one, really.
Sofia, how did you get about it?
Oh my God, I'm trying to think about it in a normal way. How can I say this? I think it's about being excited and interested about your life and about what you want to achieve and who you are. So the funny thing is that you think, okay, well, I'm very bored in this job, well, I don't feel happy, and then you just want to transition to something else. But the understanding that that transition is not into a lovely green field full of flowers and everything's going to be fine, you're going to have money, you're going to travel. You have to choose, like, what is that transition? For a lot of people will be a different kind of job, a different kind of industry, a different segment, a different complete whole career. For me, for over the last 15, 17 years, I don't know, it's been always about doing something myself, building something myself. And that doesn't change because it's a lot of suffering on the other side. It's not like I'm transitioning from a job that I hated into this peaceful kind of job that I can do whatever I want. It is literally even harder, it's more difficult, it's more stressful, but that is what drives me and that's what I love. So it's understanding what you actually want to transition to is very, very important. Because it's not like I'm gonna quit my job and start something because that's the solution for some sort of stressless life. Yeah, it's absolutely completely the opposite. It's completely the opposite. You transition to start a business because you love the hustle and you love the pain of really seeing something through. And I really want to emphasize that because a lot of promoting about quitting jobs and doing amazing stuff and living through your passion. The reality is that passion takes you enough, to a point, but it's about conviction. More than passion. It's about really, really committing to a goal and really committing to something and learning throughout the process. So for me, the time that I decided to leave Gecko Board, I love Gecko Board, but the time that I decided to do it because I needed to start something again. And I joined Gecko Board 3 years ago, and I said to Paul, the co-founder, like, I'm going to be here 2.5 years max because I'm going to start something else. I was recovering for a previous startup that failed. And I needed to recover financially and emotionally again. So I joined that. I joined a place that I really want to be part of, a company that I believe in, something that makes me feel passionate about it. And I joined it, I did it, and then I needed to leave again. But it's something that you feel that you have to do. It wasn't about escaping a bad situation. It was about transitioning to something that I wanted to do. And there's a distinction there.
Go ahead.
You gonna say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've been doing startups for now 10 years full time, and I think when I was younger I was always like, yeah, follow your passion, quit your job, start your company, let's do this. And the older I get, the more I realize it's just not for everybody, right? Like it's just not, and I think that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. And often when we talk about the subject, we live in these extremes, which is like, you're either with the big company or you're like the founder in the garage doing this new thing. And like the reality is that's not the reality. You can join a company that's maybe smaller where you can learn, you can get the experience. I think at the end of the day, it's about learning. Like I said before, that's one of the key values that we have at our company. And if you're not getting stimulated every single day, sort of like what has been said, and you're not sort of challenging yourself, stretching yourself, learning every single day, then I definitely think you need maybe to change jobs or things. But that doesn't always necessarily mean startups. And sometimes you just don't have the risk appetite to say, okay, I'm not going to take an income, I'm going to see what happens. But I would suggest, look at joining an early stage startup, maybe a company that's raised $1 million or $2 million or however many million, depending on your risk appetite. Be the 5th employee or the 10th employee or the 30th employee. And that's a way that you can sort of work your way into it and learn and get experience and figure out, okay, is this for me? Like, how does this feel? So yeah, because what I see happen often is that you'll go from quitting your big company job to starting a company, and you just flounder, you flail trying to figure it out, you spend all your savings, and it just turns into a really negative experience. And so my suggestion is just take it easy, slowly, get yourself into it, start learning, maybe join a company that's smaller, get more confident in yourself and your abilities to then one day say, okay, it's go time, let's do this. So that's what I would suggest.
And there are some ways to mitigate your personal risk in starting a company. One of the obvious ones is to surround yourself with people who have worked with you in the past or who know you, who can advise you. Reach out to advisors, people who can mentor you. If you're a sole founder, or if you're too lonely out there trying to build the next big product, then consider joining an accelerator, or just go work for some time to a co-working space. I mean, Faber Ventures history itself was made of that. I mean, when I was alone, basically reaching out to people, just trying to understand whether we would be able to build this new kind of investor firm. And I was just by myself working at a co-working space just to get in touch with founders and entrepreneurs and people in the ecosystem back in Lisbon and then in London. So part of that mitigation is also doing a lot of the homework that has to be done by yourself, and nobody can do that for you. It's actually learning about the value chain or the industry or the space where you actually believe there's a huge opportunity. You will have to be the most knowledgeable person or a group of people about that space. But then discussing that and validating ideas and exchanging ideas and sharing your plans and getting advice and getting input. It's really important for you guys to actually be willing to listen to input and then take whatever you find is the best advice. I think it's now time to extend this conversation to all of you guys. So let's open up the Q&A session.
In our case, it's still very early. We have an idea what our business model is, but it's been mostly about improving and changing the products, being more focused on the product. I always knew that this was going to be a SaaS business, and that's where my expertise comes from. And the type of product we're building just lends perfectly into that type of model. So the business model itself hasn't changed as much. It's been more about the product being the right one to fit the model in this case. Maybe you, Nick, it's been a bit longer for you.
Yeah, I would just say, so for us, the vision hasn't necessarily changed, but in terms of how we're going to make a business out of it, definitely has. And I think, and I keep saying this, but I believe in it so much, is just be willing to adapt, right? Like, yes, you should have an opinion, yes, you should have a vision, yes, you should have sort of a spine of like, this is what we're doing, but don't be foolish, right? Like if the market and the people you're speaking with and, smart people are saying the same thing, you just need to recognize and acknowledge that maybe you need to make a few tweaks. Customers are saying this, people are saying that. And so just be willing to adapt. And if you go through those cycles fast enough in terms of learning and adapting, ultimately you basically just need to go through those cycles fast enough that you can find sort of the thing that works before you run out of money. And that's basically how, like, to summarize a startup in the most simplistic way, that's essentially it. Just go through those cycles enough times that you land on something that works before you run out of money.
We personally had funding. The one thing that we did do though is make sure that our employee equity pool was really generous. I'd seen previous companies where I just didn't feel that they'd allocated enough, and if everyone's going to be putting everything into building the business and only a few people are walking away with the spoils if a good outcome happens, like that's not very right at all. And so we really allocated as much as possible. But for us it was we already had the money in the bank, and we kind of do this thing that I learned from another friend of mine, Simon Haid, who's the founder of Space 8 Games, a great company, where sort of bringing people on board is kind of a negotiation around, and there's contrary evidence, there's contrary feeling about this, about not necessarily paying what they're worth or they can find elsewhere, but what they need to kind of get by and live a comfortable enough life so that they're not miserable. And you give them a salary spread and an employee and a share spread, and you say, well, pick where your risk appetite is and what you need. Whereas I think in the Valley it's probably a lot more driven by what you can earn, just because of the immense buoyancy and demand that's going on there. But that's how we kind of got some of our earlier employees, and the more successful the software the company becomes, then you can start unleashing that a little bit and allowing people to, live a little bit more frivolously.
Well, given that my team is very small, I can only say that it's been about pitching the vision and what they can actually learn from the experience. And for instance, for my co-founder, Lucas, it was about like, what is that you want to do? Yeah, don't you feel that could be an exciting and awesome journey for starting solving this problem? So it's more about pitching the vision, yeah. And it is people like I'm being very lucky because, for instance, our designer, he had a startup before. So he knows what it takes, and he knows it's hard, and he knows the suffering and all the things involved into the process. So he's also driven by that energy, and he likes the risk and the feeling of how we're going to build something from scratch. By one of our developers that I met through Faber, he's so driven by learning and developing like crazy, amazing technical skills. So that's what he's passionate about. So it's easy to sell him because we're solving a hard problem. So it is about finding people that feel excited about doing things and building things from scratch at the very beginning. Later, it's a very different dynamic. I can only speak from the very core team, and the motivation has to be very similar. We want to do this together, we want to learn and join this journey kind of situation. The money, it has to be a secondary thing, because you can definitely, unless you have tons of money, a big round of funding, you will not have the resources to offer amazing salaries. So it has to be a secondary element. The most important thing for them has to be, why would I spend my time with these people? And it has to be about learning most of the time.
So a few tactical pieces of advice. One, if you can convince somebody to join you full time and just give them equity and not pay, that's great, and you should definitely do that. I think generally when you're just getting started, you should try to work with people who you trust and you know-ish, because so often, so startups usually die for two reasons. One, they run out of money, and two, just there's early conflicts with founders and disagreements on vision and direction, and that's like really common for that to happen. So you really want to surround yourself early on with people who you trust, who perhaps you've worked with before in the past, etc. I think the reality is, so if you don't have funding, and this is somebody who requires to be able to pay bills, I think the tactical thing that I've done before and that I've suggested to a number of people do, and it's worked well, is you simply say, okay, you're going to work part-time, nights and weekends, I'm going to give you this equity, but this is under the condition that when we get funding, you're going to join me full-time. And this equity, obviously best practice for equity is 4-year vesting, 1-year cliff. You can look that up if you're wondering what that means. But essentially, that gives you a little bit of safety net that when you get funding, they are definitely going to join you, and that they've agreed that, and you're going to be able to help them pay the bills once you get that funding. So that's just obviously it's not full-time, it's not the most optimal thing, but the reality is most of us, we have bills to pay and we can't quit our full-time job. So that's just one way that you can do it, is just say, okay, I'm gonna give you this equity, let's do this, we're doing this, but when we get funding and when we can pay you full-time, you've got to do this for that equity to actually get realized. The other thing, and this is, I met with a founder today who I spoke with him 1.5 years, and I gave him this advice. He came to me and said, Mick, yeah, I get all that, I've tried that, it still hasn't worked, I can't get people to like help me do this. And I said, well, it just depends how bad you want it and how deep of a desire you have to make this happen. And I said, if you really have that deep of a desire, then you simply just need to start building it yourself. And he's like, well, I don't code, I don't know how to code. And I said, figure it out. How bad do you want this? And he spent 3 to 4 months. He dropped out of medical school because he was just so excited about his idea. He spent 3 to 4 months hustling, teaching himself how to code. He's never going to be the world's best engineer, and that doesn't matter. He doesn't need to be the world's best engineer. He just needs to get it to a point where he can show people, or he can inspire people, he can excite people, he can say, this is what I'm working on, come join me, let's do this. And so that's what I would suggest, is that if you're not able to get people in, there's so many resources online to learn how to get a prototype, how to get something basic. And sometimes that's all you need. You just need something that people can touch and play with and see, and then they get it, and then it clicks. So that's what I would suggest. I do not suggest outsourcing. That's just I just do not suggest that. There's just too many things that have gone wrong with that. So those are just a few of the tactical things that I would suggest.
Well, the one final comment I might add is that, I mean, although this industry of building startups and investing in startups has its conventions, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. So, I mean, depending on the type of company that you're actually wanting to build, you might consider actually a longer bootstrapping period, or you might really acknowledge that you really need early angels in to actually provide the backing for you to hire the proper people. Or if you have a larger network and you have really relevant connections that you can trigger at universities or at companies, people you know, people you can reach out to and ask for help, maybe you can sort of borrow some of their resources for a while, just while you bootstrap, until you get to eligibility stage for some kind of investment. But it's sort of research that you have to do on your own, depending on the specific type of company that you're building. And if you look at the industry data that is out there, you actually can learn a bit. You know that on average, to build an IPO-able e-commerce company, you will require $200 million on average. Although if you're building a software as a service company, that will probably be around $70 to $80 million to fund the whole journey of 8 years until IPO. So it's different, and it's different because the go-to market is different, the type of brand that you have to build is different, the type of people that you have to surround yourself with are different. And so depending on the specific type of company, you might have to go about different tactics, and you can attract people in different ways. We've seen a lot of different cases. We've seen people actually moving from London to Lisbon just to leverage sort of keeping their early teams under the radar, just to not have their developers being poached by competing startups or whatever. The same happened in Berlin over the last 5 years, just to also leverage like lower cost of life in general. So it's easier to bootstrap, longer time to live in the early days. Maybe more talent available, but that happens in Eastern Europe also, although it's a different ecosystem. You just find less angels or less structured VCs you can talk to. So you really have to think about what your company will need over time, and then make your own personal decisions. And if you build that trustworthy narrative for yourself, it'll be easier for you to attract new people.
So Mike, come on, you laugh at
No way,
no, come on.
It's like you make them all the time. I mean, that's kind of why I'm laughing. I think pretty much every week you'll make a mistake. I'm trying to think of.
I'll share one that I think if you want me to. Yeah, so I think one of the I met with this friend earlier today who learned how to code, etc. And I think one of the common mistakes that entrepreneurs make, and I made this when I was getting started, is around the fundraising process when you're talking to investors. And I think for an inexperienced entrepreneur, we expect that, we get the meeting, we pitch them, and then they decide if they're going to invest or not in that one golden meeting. And that's just not the reality, I think. And so I think that's really important if you're thinking of fundraising, for you to understand that. And obviously he's an investor, he can add a lot more to this. But I've had the most success in fundraising. So in total now I've raised, between all the companies, more than $10 million. And I've had the most success in raising money from people who have become my friends, like him, right? It's over a many series of meetings and time together that it turns into he likes me and he's rooting for my success and he wants to help see that I succeed. And anyway, that is the main mistake that we young or inexperienced entrepreneurs often make is, perfect, I got this meeting, I'm going to go pitch them and we're going to hope that they give me money. And no, you need to be building that relationship over time. Build that and start that even before you're fundraising. Let them see the progress. Let them see that you value them for more than just their money, but for their wisdom, for their expertise, for their knowledge. That is so important, because these guys get sick of you just coming to them for their money. They want to see that you value them for the other things that they can provide. And so just get that relationship started much sooner than when you actually need funding.
Yeah, the mistakes are every day, every second, but I think that the takeaway from that is just you feel, you lose your ego and you become so humble in the process, because all you're doing is just making mistakes one after the other, and you're trying to fix them quickly and trying to understand how to go straight again in the right course and get everybody on the same page. So in terms of recovering, that is the difficult part, because it's not like a one mistake that I made and that screw everything up. Like, it doesn't happen that way. It is just having the wrong conversations, not communicating well what we need to achieve this week. It is not following up on conversations with investors when you had to. It is making decisions too fast because you just want to move fast but not even realizing the consequences of things. So it is every single day a challenge, but understanding that that is part of the process and the learning curve, it makes it so much easier and better, the whole situation. But it's just every single mistake. I don't know, Mick, you have a ton of more experience than at least me, but I wonder if you can really pinpoint like one specific thing that really ruined everything.
Do you have any? Well, I don't know. If you have something that I can add after.
Most of them boil down to inaction, or doing something too slowly and not pulling the trigger too quickly on something. Whether it's like a hiring mistake that you've made and you kind of maybe believe that it'll come right somehow, or like a product mistake that you just don't change quickly enough, or maybe a decision that's just been just too big and insurmountable, and so you have this inaction about doing something about it, and like just making the decision and learning from it and moving on, and making the decision and moving from it and learning on is the only way. I think every kind of thing that I regret is probably not acting quickly enough or dramatically enough on a particular problem.
Well, I had a boss a few years ago, who taught me that a bad decision is much better than not making a decision at all. And most of the common mistakes that we see is actually sort of the lack of focus and too much hesitation. I mean, going back to the beginning of our talk, I've never heard from anyone say, well, if I had to make the decision again, I would have waited longer to quit my job and start a company. And this is a consistent type of situation that you actually experience whenever you discuss with founders. Be it you're launching a company, you're developing a product, you're hiring someone you really want on your team, you actually reaching out to an investor because you want to exchange ideas and share your plans and share your vision. I mean, don't wait. And if you just take the wrong step, well, then you have to pivot, right? And get to the right direction. But don't lose time, because by far, if you're building an internet company, velocity is your key competitive advantage. Sometimes if you keep attentive to what's happening out there in the marketplace, sometimes time plays on your favor. Sometimes a lot happens while you're building a company, and the competitive landscape changes in such a way that you can, even because you didn't come in first and you didn't launch before anyone else, you can actually in due time pivot and then reposition your value proposition or your company. But I mean, it's very dynamic, and hesitation is a huge enemy to building a company in the early days.
I'll share one other mistake. So, and this is super obvious, but I wanted to share it because it's really important. And simply that is, don't let yourself run out of money. As soon as you run out of money, game over, right? So just be super cautious about that, and associated with that, like, have a business model. I've spent some time here on this, talking about fundraising. He's an investment, and obviously I think, the press or TechCrunch, we're always glorifying, closing a round of funding, etc. But like, it would be great if you didn't have to get investors. It would be great if you actually had a business that made money from day one or early on, and you didn't have to rely on that. So just be thinking about what is the business model behind it. It's so easy to look at these outliers like Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or whatever. It's like, oh, they didn't think about a business until, they didn't even think about it early on. But that's just not the reality for most startups. So think about how you're going to make money. Revenue forgives sins, right? We all make mistakes. We're going to screw up. But having some revenue come in to offset the cost is so important. My first company, we didn't have a perfect product. We were still trying to figure it out. Zinch, the one that connected universities with high school students. But we were able to convince universities to pay us. And that prolonged life, it gave us the time we needed to figure out the product. So think about how you can get to revenue as quickly as you can so that you don't run out of money.
Well, guys, I think we've completed one last question.
I can start. It's very tech focused at the beginning, but for instance, it's as a very, I don't know if it's the same case for everybody here, but somebody that can do everything. That is exactly the profile that you're looking for, is somebody that understands how to acquire customers, but equally can go and send some t-shirts and the post to the beta users, and then can run and do some crazy spreadsheet to calculate some costs, and then do an interview for user research. There's somebody that can really do a lot of things well, or a lot of things fast as well. Is a typical profile that I would look after having amazing engineers, but it's about helping, because then you can get to specialize and you get to build teams that are very focused, but at the beginning everybody has to help. So the same case with customer support. Everybody does customer support at the very beginning. Hopefully as you grow, people will be in touch with customers too. But yeah, somebody that can do everything. That's the perfect profile.
But I mean, you're only really going to have one of those people.
Yeah,
I think it depends on the type of business you're building. Our business is very technology centric. And when in the early days, you're just trying to get the product right, and that's pretty much just building products. And you can have salespeople or project managers, they're not going to add any value to getting the product right? Because that's all you're trying to do. But if you're building, say, something that's powered by technology, like Packed Coffee, which is a great startup, and they fulfill, some subscription coffee type thing, or that's not necessarily purely a technology business at all, and so you need different types of people in that business. Or my friends get at Farm Drop, who they do distribution, and actually most of what they do is about logistics and about sourcing great products, and technology is actually kind of secondary. So I think it's really depends on the type of business that you're trying to do, but I think the most important thing is just people who can effectively execute stuff quickly, and more than anything else. That is the most important thing that I would look for, depending on what type of business you're looking at.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Personally, when I'm hiring a non-technical person and a technical person, I still look at our values. The values are, to me, no different if it's technical or not. So, yeah. But I agree with everything that's been said.
Sorry, we'll have to. Okay.
So a few reasons, a few things come to mind for me. One is it's better for us to be a little bit bigger fish in a smaller pond. In Silicon Valley, there's startups everywhere, not just startups, but all the big companies that are competing for the same talent. So it's just more expensive to hire engineers, just given the dynamics there, and it's harder to retain them. Everybody's leaving, starting their own companies. So that's one thing, is we can attract and retain talent in a better way. The second is we're setting ourselves up to be a global company from day one, right? We feel so often there's these Silicon Valley startups. They're like, okay, now we want to go beyond the U.S. What do we do? How does it work? Where do we begin? And we know how to do it in the U.S. And from day one, we're thinking about an international company going global. And so there are huge advantages to that. We'll be one step ahead of a lot of people that are maybe doing things in a similar space in the U.S. So I would say those are two of the big reasons. I mean, obviously, London is not San Francisco. It's not New York. There's still, but I think for outside of those two places, outside of the U.S., this is definitely, I think, the best place to be for if you're thinking about startups.
I agree. Well, to all of you, thank you so much for your time and for your attention and for being here with us today. Thank you to the three of you. Thank you to the three of you for sharing your stories and sharing your.
Thank you for investing in us.
Yeah.
One final note, I mean, just feel free to reach out to us. Ricardo is permanently in London in our team here at Faber Ventures, and reach out to us after this and let's discuss anything that you want to share with us, okay? Thank you all.